at the agreement which was reached between Iran and P5+1. You may be aware that we had signed the Pakistan-Iran gas pipeline agreement during the last days of the former regime. And we have full intentions of completing this particular pipeline because, it is going to solve or address some of our energy needs. But with Iran, the thing is that when you look at Pakistan-Iran relationship, it's a relationship which you can say is strong, but it also has the problems because, they are at times clashes on the border. Now, the clashes at the border which take place, most of the time it's got nothing to do with Pakistan or Iran. It has got to do with these elements which use that particular porous border again for transiting. There's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of human smuggling and trafficking. And whenever they open fire, then we get into trouble. We then need to again put together our energies, to develop a synergy to actually move forward with this little irritant. Now, talking very strategically, Iran has a great interest in the region. It has a lot of places of worship which are of immense importance to the Shiites. We can dwell upon this thing for a very long time about the differences between the Shiites and the Sunnis, which get translated into a sort of a tussle between Iran and some of the other GCC countries. But closer to our own country, Iran was extremely active in Pakistan, and they had a string of these cultural centers. Khana-e-Farang Iran, when you were there, they were very much on the landscape. And then, obviously, the sympathies of these are with the Shiite population. And then you have the Sunni population, and if you look at the demographic divide of Pakistan, they are close to about 80 to 85% of the population is Sunni, and anything between 15 to 80% of the population is Shiite, because you cannot have very fixed numbers. And there is this perception that the Saudis, I'm talking about a perception, you cannot say it's a reality, that the Saudis support the Sunnis and the Iranians, they support the Shiites. This is a perception of the people, and perceptions at times are worse than the reality. But Iran has a great interest in Afghanistan. Likewise, India also has a great interest in Afghanistan. The Indians have a string of consulates. They have heavily contributed towards social and economic development of Afghanistan. They have contributed a huge amount of money to various projects. As far as the Iranians are concerned, they also have their very strong pockets of influence in Afghanistan. Now, the people who know Afghanistan well very easily know that in Afghanistan you have a number of languages which are spoken. You have the Dari, you have the Pashto, and then you have the Persian. So obviously Persian-speaking people have got more affinity towards the Iranians. Now, what becomes complicated in the Afghan situation is that there are a number of countries which have got nothing to do with the region, but who are in Afghanistan for one, strategic, and secondly for economic reasons. Because Afghanistan has a wealth of mineral deposits which are still unexplored. And when you talk about Afghanistan, you are talking about the Iranian interest, you are talking about the Indian interest, and let's not forget the interest of the Chinese. The Chinese also have an interest. One, economic. And the second thing is that in Afghanistan, there is known presence of the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement. And that particular movement, ETIM as it's called, it is a curse for the Chinese. They just want to completely eliminate it because one, it's a terrorist organization. And secondly, they have made inroads into the Chinese society, and they have caused incidences in the Tiananmen Square, and also some terrorist incidences in the western provinces of China. So the basic thing is that yes, there are lots of converging interests of countries in Afghanistan. Now the biggest problem is that what does Pakistan do? For that reason, we always say that a solution to Afghanistan has to be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led. And then the international community has to stay engaged. Because think of, it's hypothetical. Think of a scenario in which everybody withdraws. Like, when you're talking about the ISAF, you're talking about the US, it's hypothetical. But then the regional powers will use Afghanistan as a playground. Because nobody can afford to have an Afghanistan which is completely anti a particular country. We cannot afford to have an Afghanistan which is against us, because even when we are constantly engaging with them, whatever happens over there continues to affect us. So think of a hypothetical situation where you've got nothing to do with the Afghans, and then it becomes a playing field for either the Iranians or it becomes a playing field for either the Indians. So it's a complex situation. For that reason, by and large, we have very good relations with Iran, and the government has all the desire, and so does the Iranian leadership, of further strengthening these ties. And we are hopeful that after these sanctions are lifted, the quantum of trade between Pakistan and Iran will increase, because right now the trade is, I think, down to about 200 million, which is nothing. It's basically either barter or because you actually cannot go through the banks because you suffer from sanctions. And the potential between the two countries of trade is very large, because when you didn't have the sanctions, the figure was in billions of dollars. So with Iran, we want to have a very good friendship and a very good understanding on most of the things. And likewise, you absolutely rightly said that as far as Iran is concerned, it does have not only an interest in Afghanistan, but has a greater interest in the Middle East. And for that reason, if you look at a large number of analyses which have been presented, there are a lot of the GCC countries. It is projected that they are extremely unhappy with the arrangement which was reached between P5+1 and Iran. But again, purely from a foreign policy point of view, I feel that engagement of Iran in the Middle East would be beneficial to all countries, because having an Iran which is outward looking and friendly would be better than an isolated Iran. Because then if you isolate a country, then you cannot reach a solution. But if you move along with that country, then you can negotiate and you can find some sort of solution to whatever the thing is. And I think the way things are in the Middle East and the ISIL and all, which I went over a couple of minutes ago, that all this thing goes across boundaries. So when things they go across boundaries, then you have to ensure that there is a collaborative arrangement between the various countries. so that they can actually address the problem. So I think I've answered your question on Iran. Your question was on the Middle East. Middle East is right now pretty complicated. Pakistan has had a very good relationship with the Middle East. It still does. Because of our extremely good relations with the countries. And also because of the fact that, the Islam card does play a role because you have the OIC. Now, what has happened in the Middle East is that since the Arab Spring, the Middle East continues to remain in turmoil. Because once the Arab Spring took place, starting from Tunisia, everybody thought that, things will just keep on moving on, and it was the best thing which had happened and all, but somehow the Arab Spring turned into an Arab autumn, and that autumn still continues. If you look at the countries in the Middle East, you have problems in Syria, you have problems in Egypt. Well, Egypt is, I don't think Egypt is still out of the woods, but you have problems over there. Then again, Iraq. It's still where it is. And now you have the problem in Yemen. And then obviously Saudi Arabia has its own way of thinking about Yemen. But here I would like to just tell you that the government of Pakistan took a decision that we will not get involved and we will not take any sides. The only thing which we agreed to was that if anything happens to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Saudi Arabia, then we will act. But we were not part of the coalition which took action in Yemen. We didn't send our troops because we believe in a policy of neutrality. Because that particular policy, I think, helps everyone. And as far as the Middle East is concerned, in most countries we have the policy that the conflict should be settled by the people with the leadership through negotiations. They are ethnic conflicts. You cannot deny them. There is a sectarian strife. You have the Shiites, you have the Sunnis. These differences have to be bridged. You have seen in Iraq, you have seen what is happening in Libya. The basic thing is that fighting breeds more fighting. It really doesn't lead to a result. So, at the end of the day, whatever arrangement you reach, it has to be a negotiated settlement. So for that reason, in the Middle East, the policy has to be one of reconciliation, of trying to find a solution which is acceptable to most. It will be completely like asking for the moon acceptable to all. It cannot be acceptable to all. It has to be acceptable to most. That's the way at least I look at the problem. Talking about the US, oh God, it's a long, long story. You asked the question, and I thought you were on my side, trying to answer that computer. Well, you see, with the US, things become complicated because you have to deal with a number of issues at times on which the administration is with you, but the Congress is not with you. It's just a matter of looking at things. when I talk about the lowest point of our relationship, it is the Salala incident. Now, there are a number of things like the Coalition Support Fund, like the Americans have held some portions of it. And then here I use the word which is called the mantra of do more. Because the Americans keep on saying, fine, you've done this thing, now do more, now do more. So, that's what it is. And then at times a lot of things are really, really blown out of proportions. Because when Susan Rice was in Pakistan, I think a few days ago, the press conference which was done by the American embassy, they actually only concentrated on the divergences. They never concentrated on the convergences. In fact, by the meeting which took place with the National Security Advisor as well as with the Prime Minister was extremely congenial. We discussed everything under the sun. But like, if you go out and you only talk about, okay, we asked Pakistan to do this, then it gives a very different picture to the general people. And that thing was rectified by the Foreign Secretary as well as by the advisor in their respective press conferences on the grounds which we covered. And like I said, also like with the Indians, when you talk to someone, you cannot cherry pick. You have to discuss all the things which are on the table. That's the only way of arriving at a solution. You cannot arrive at a solution by saying that, okay, we are just going to talk about the Coalition Support Fund and we're going to talk about nothing else. And then there's another thing which is, which probably I think you didn't use the words, but you are hinting at, is the Haqqani network. Yes, you wanted to say something.
About the eradication of terrorism in Middle East, you believe it's possible an effective dialogue between religious leaders in Middle East?
Okay, I'll answer your question. But let me finish with the one on the US. So when you talk about there is a perception that Pakistan is favoring the Haqqani network because the Haqqani network is there, and then Pakistan is saving it for the time that it can help Pakistan somewhere deep down the road in Afghanistan. But I refer you, just go on to YouTube. And go to about a few years ago, and you will see that people of the Haqqani network were also present on the lawns of the White House. So the basic thing is, what the point I'm trying to make is that when we have taken a policy decision that we don't have any favorites in the war on terror, that is across the board. Because, let me explain something. In North Waziristan, we do surgical strikes. We pinpoint a target, we have intelligence, and then we go in the chase. And then, once we have softened the target, then we send in the troops. And you'll be amazed, a harmless looking house will have a factory underneath it, which is like, the size of about 3 houses, which is making weapons. So, at times, the quantum is so much that we can't even remove them, we have to destroy them. So, in this particular war on terror, because it is our own survival which is at stake, we cannot have favorites. We cannot take sides. Because if we take sides today, we are going to pay a very heavy price tomorrow. But with the US, obviously it's a relationship which I would say is strong. It's not a weak relationship. Because I'm saying the relationship is strong, because if it wasn't strong, it wouldn't have lasted the lows which we've had. it's a relationship which is beneficial to the both of us. I mean, do you think that, the Americans can really operate in Afghanistan without some sort of support from Pakistan? If that was the case, they would have just simply left us out after 9/11 and they would have gone in themselves. It's not really the case. So it's a relationship in which you are also partially dependent upon one another. And it's not a relationship which is just like, you can call it a strategic one. It is also political. It is also economic. There is a huge economic content to it. There is a huge American assistance development program which is running. So it's people tend to compartmentalize things, but that's not really the case. You have to look at the broader picture of things. That's one thing. And then secondly, you mentioned about what's going to, well, this is President Obama is in the last few months of his presidency. Now, I don't know. I mean, all I can say is one thing, that the engagement and the relationship will continue. It always does. I mean, whether it is the Democrats or whether it is the Republicans, the relationship is much deeper than any other, than the whims and desires of any political party. That also holds true for Pakistan. Whether it is the PMLN or whether it is the PPP or whether it is a coalition. I mean, some relationships are there. They are just simply there. You can't do anything about them. Hey, you can talk about a certain degree, but after the initial few days, they just tend to balance out, because the content is so strong that it's a lasting relationship. When you talk about the Middle East, negotiations, yes. But again, with the negotiations, you also have to take some action. Because the basic thing is that if you go in with weaponry, you cause a lot of collateral damage. And when you cause a lot of damage, that at times is counterproductive. So what do you need to do? You need to actually ensure that the monster which is growing, it's not fed. You have to stop the channels of funding. You have to ensure that there is no counterterrorism financing. Right? You have to ensure that the established networks are slowly dismantled. For that, you have to use a lot of intelligence. You have to use a lot of make or break things with other people. But it is not one thing. It is a combination of factors. And I think those combinations are in play. And then you also need a clear line of what you aim to do. And right now, I think there is a lot which can be done. Because should this ISIL or Desh, as people call it, be mishandled, it has the potential of expanding. Because they have this, the thing which I always find it different from Al-Qaeda is that, it has a lot of technical and educated people on its side. Because Al-Qaeda was basically it had some people, or when you talk about the Taliban, they were the people who lived by the gun, who died by the gun. But these are people who have a vision, they have an outreach, they are educated, they are, to some extent, a lot of them are extremely westernized. So, and for that reason, if you see, the amount of atrocities and the type of atrocities which these people commit, I don't think there is any parallel of them in recent history. It's like, it's like absolutely amazing. So like, to deal with them, it cannot be a single country operation. It has to be.
Excuse me, there is not an interview, it is a question session. Because okay, there are two more questions. First, our colleague here, and then the last conclusion.
Unfortunately, I come from the Middle East. I'm ambassador of Egypt. And I had 3 questions, and you answered 2 of them. But in answering one of the questions, you made a comment on Arab Spring, and you made a comment on Egypt. And you said that Egypt is not yet out of the woods. And I have to respond to that by telling you that no, Egypt is maybe not completely out of the woods, but it's going out of the woods, and by the end of this year we will have parliamentary elections, and thus completing the roadmap, and by the beginning of next year we will have a complete political system. But we face a problem like Pakistan and terrorism, and here's my 3rd question. You spoke about ISIS, which I wanted to dwell on it. Is there any relationship between ISIS and the terrorist groups in Pakistan? Is there a relationship with Taliban Pakistan? Are they in conflict? Because ISIS now is in conflict, for example, with some other groups, in whether we are speaking about Gaza or Syria. So what's the relationship, and how do you compare? You spoke at length about ISIS and what it's doing in Syria, Iraq, post Libya, and even in northern Sinai and Egypt. So are they extending their influence to, are they reaching Pakistan, Afghanistan? Because I read some press reports that some of the Afghani terrorist group are joining ISIS. How credible is that in your point of view?
Thank you, Ambassador. When I said that it's not out of the woods, I was actually referring to some of the processes which yet have to be completed. You've asked a very pertinent question about the ISIL. I was in fact in discussion with one of my very learned colleagues from a Western country, and he went into the detail, and probably you can enlighten the audience because I'm not Arabic speaking. He went into the detail and he said that the name should not be ISIL, it should be Daesh. He then went into the details of what it actually meant. It's a sort of a different terminology. What you have asked is that, I will tell you what has happened in Pakistan. We've had a few wall shockings in favor of ISIL. But being extremely cognizant of the fact that should there be a nexus which develops between any of the terrorist known organizations in Pakistan with the ISIL, it would be disastrous for us. So our intelligence agencies are on the lookout. And so far, we have not discovered any credible links to establish some of the terrorist groups in Pakistan with linkages with the Daesh or ISIL. Yes, there have been reports. I'm talking about reports, but we cannot substantiate them, of individuals going, again, through Iran, because that route is used by a lot of people for illegal immigration and going and fighting for ISIL. But they are not substantiated reports. What you referred to about Afghanistan, yes, we also have some information that there are some linkages which are in the process of being established between some of the groups which are operating in Afghanistan and between the ISIL. But to answer your question in one word, our intelligence agencies are on the lookout but as we speak, I cannot talk about tomorrow, but as we speak, apart from wall jockings, that too, in two or three incidences, one was in Balochistan, and I think two were in southern Punjab, no other links.
Yeah, thank you. There is one more question.
Thank you. So, you very clearly presented what is your strategy in terms of foreign policy towards the most important countries and regions and organizations in the world. And what I kindly ask you, Minister, is to give us and to tell us a few words about the economical landscape. What's the weight, for example, of each of these countries in terms of foreign trade, in terms of foreign investments and so on?
You know, because for any country to develop, you need to have an economic agenda. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, I briefly, because of the paucity of time, didn't go into the details. One, he believes in good governance. Secondly, we are doing investment conferences all over the world to actually invite investments into Pakistan. There are a large number of sectors. We are right now an energy deficient country. You may be aware of that. We were supposed to actually produce about 23,000 megawatts of electricity, but we are producing somewhere around 14 to 15,000. So at the end of the day, there is always a shortfall dependent upon the weather and all of about 6 to 7,000. So we have to resort to load shedding and stuff like this. So we are trying to invite investments into our electricity sector, into the energy sector, and when I talk about the energy sector, it is oil and gas and all these other things. Now, just from the top of my head, and please recheck these figures because, it's not a human. I'm human. I'm not a computer. With the EU, I told you, it's a pretty substantive trade. Pakistan's overall trade is somewhere around 70 to 80 billion dollars, right? And if you look at the broad the areas which I actually touched upon, Africa, we are aiming at about $5 billion. With the US, we have about I think $7 to $8 billion. With the EU, it is about 11.4. With China, again, we are aiming at about right now it's about 12.8 or something. But we are aiming at about $50 billion. And obviously with India, it's close to about 3. Huge potential. And tomorrow, if we mend our fences, it's a huge potential. When I talk about the NDMA, the non-discriminatory market access, that virtually opens out the markets of the two countries to one another. And with Afghanistan, it's about 2. So, I just confine myself to these particular regions because of the paucity of time. But when you look at the economy of the country, we still have specialized economic zones in the country. There is 100% equity. You can take back the profits. We actually provide the manpower. We try to provide as much as energy which we have. And the basic aim is to improve our relations in trade. Because if we do not have a stable and a growing economy, there is no way that you can actually make progress. You cannot improve the lot of the people because you need to give them. We have a very low unemployment rate, it's something like between 6 to 7%. But again, a large part of our economy is not